We are gathered here again for our next and most incredible and fascinating interview that would be presented to you fresh from the American Academy of Dissident Sciences. We are here at a secret location in Pasadena with some of the most astonishing speakers and authors and researchers in this field. But let us first present the topic of our interview tonight. We will try to talk about the highest echelons of the secret societies on this planet, the highest echelons of Freemasonry, of the Knights Templars, of the Illuminati. Secret societies that are probably secret for this very simple reason, that there are a lot of secret things going on at their highest echelons that should not get into the public under any circumstances. And from our humble knowledge into the field, we will try to create a picture to elucidate this puzzle, to put the jigsaw puzzle together. With us here tonight, we have the incredible pleasure to have Eustace Mullins, who has been writing in the field of conspiratology and has been exposing the secrets of the American evilarchy, as some researchers call it, for more than, how many years already? 50 years?
50 years, yes.
For more than 50 years. And he has published about 15 books,
15 books, yes.
And 5 videos that would also be, the videos will be available. They are already available from the American Academy, and probably some of his books, because I'm sure that there will be an incredible interest in these topics. With us tonight is also Jordan Maxwell, who has been investigating for how many years already?
About 35, 36 now.
The secret symbology, the secret symbolic graphic language of these secret societies, the messages that are transmitted through these symbols and how they influence the public subconscious, and basically the education, and most of all the education of our children. So at the end of today's discussion, we would go to the education of the young generation, and to the new and upcoming and probably the most interesting book by Eustace, which is
Education for Slavery.
Education for Slavery, Education for the New World Order, Education for this new and upcoming global socialism or communism. A lot more hideous and a lot more sinister than anything that the regimes of Lenin or Hitler or Stalin or anywhere in Eastern Europe after World War II, even possibly in North Korea, any of these evil totalitarian regimes were able to attain. So let's start the discussion with just a brief picture, a brief analysis of the top echelons of these secret societies and the practices that they are involved in. It has been widely rumored that the top echelons have been engaging for centuries in homosexual practices, that they have been using these homosexual practices for mind control, not just for horizontal recreation or for kinky horizontal recreation, but for the specific purposes of mind control and of influencing their members. What would you say for that topic, Eustace?
Well, there's no question that there is a demonic element in homosexuality, which, by the way, the psychiatric profession has never dared to touch. And of course you cannot treat a homosexual by a psychiatrist without going into the demonic practice that it really is. So this remains a great gap in the treatment and in the literature on homosexuality, because you see this goes all the way back to the dawn of history, to Genesis, to the Canaanites, the curse of Canaan. And the Canaanites have always used homosexuality, not only for control, also for to break down the integrated personality, which gives you a much more pliable subject. And it's a basic feature of behaviorism.
It's very interesting. I mean, we would not like this tape to sound as another gay bashing tape. We have nothing against probably 95% of all gays that are basically practicing recreational homosexuality. What we're interested in here is the very small percentage of gay men that happen also to belong to the social subset of secret societies, and especially the most high echelons of these secret societies that engage in homosexuality for totally different purposes, namely for mind control, for social control, and so on. What would you say, Jordan?
Well, if you remember that secret societies as social movements, as Eustace says, go all the way back to the beginning of man's history. And there has been two schools of thought concerning the modern-day Freemasonic societies. One is that they started out as a good idea and eventually got corrupted, or that they never were any good to start with, and that any society that needs to operate in secret just was not any good to begin with.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah, and so I tend to believe that anytime you have societies operating in secret, there's always going to be this element of activity that's covering something. And it's fascinating, as we were saying before, when you get into the symbols and emblems of these ancient secret societies, going all the way back to the Sumerians, and as he brought out the ancient Canaanites, throughout the Middle East, symbols and emblems are like alphabets. It's like symbols in the alphabet. If you put enough of them together, they will tell you a story. And that's the kind of thing that I've been interested in years, is the way these emblems and symbols in government, religious orders, fraternal orders, all have connecting emblems and connecting concepts, and it's a fascinating subject.
It's a very secret alphabet that allows only the initiates of the highest echelons of this secret society to understand the messages. It's like a subspace channel coded message of
Well, if you understand
hyper words.
if you understand that doctors have their own language, attorneys have their own language, the clergy have their own terminology and their language. It's only to be even teenagers and young people have their own language, and so it's only to be expected that secret societies would have their emblems and symbols and ways of connecting themselves to each other in foreign lands and terminology. But I'm saying that if you go into the national coats of arms of nations, flags, all of the harlotry of the coming out of the Middle Ages, all of these things have a very powerful significance on the world in which we're living today. And there's a whole world of knowledge operating beneath civilization.
I've heard some rumors. I mean, basically, we cannot in 2 hours here bring indestructible evidence. A lot of the discussion tonight would be about rumors and stories and so on, but still they paint a picture that is quite a bit self-standing. I've heard, for example, stories that the highest echelons of the Knights Templars are a Sodomic society. What would you say on that matter?
Well, I think that's true. I think that's borne out. And in fact, when the King of France, I think it was Philip, when after the Templars, homosexuality was one of the reasons for the crackdown on them. But of course, what he really wanted was the fortune, the great treasure which the Templars had amassed, and also he felt that they were a political threat, and so he would gain several objectives at one time, and also gain their treasure by attacking them on the, by then, I think, well-established grounds of homosexual practices.
So basically, there is no way for somebody to go that high in the hierarchy of these organizations without being homosexual, at least in the Knights Templars.
I think not. I think it's almost like a very advanced initiation ceremony, and of course, engaging in homosexual practices becomes a final committal to the innermost purposes of the order. And once you've done that, and I guess there's no coming back really once you've been initiated into homosexual operations or activities, you can no longer be a non-homosexual. There's no coming back from that. And I think that they realized this and that they wanted this as the final commitment from the official.
How about Freemasonry? Have you heard any stories about the highest echelons of Freemasonry engaging in?
If you go back into the most ancient times, religion has always had sex connected to it, and especially the occult religions are very, very connected in so many ways to sex. Sex was a very big part of the ancient world and of the symbols coming out of the ancient world, and it even comes into our modern day in so many ways that we don't even think about, such as the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. is the male phallic, and it connects with the Oval Office, which is the female, which is the generating force, which is the G for Freemasonry. The G within the square and the compass stands for the generative force of sex. And as I said, the ancient world had a very heavy influence on sex. Sex was used in all of the rituals,
and especially
words and terms and
black
symbols.
magic sex.
Absolutely, and I believe that the people who are at the top of the world today are using sexual magic, and I think that's probably why so much sex is flaunted in movies, television.
The sexual revolution
Yes.
itself,
Yeah.
free
It's
sex.
all part of not a revolution just for freedom and free sex, but it has an integral part to play in the overall occult movements of the world to open the human mind up to sexual perversion. Also lowers the inhibition in a human being to accept anything. And once you have once you have compromised your morals in that way, you are now ready to be compromised with money.
The next step.
The next step, and with power, and then you've been bought. So
because I've heard that basically the highest levels of Freemasonry are quite a bit into homosexuality, and
it should not surprise me.
it becomes basically a very cozy boys club, and in a way an initiation into the next and higher degree is probably all the members of that secret Masonic cell taking turns at the
Well, I have once a
newcomer.
I had once a teacher make the point that I thought was very significant, just in passing, that this whole apparatus that we call the secret societies has as its basis a war between the sexes, going all the way back into the prehistoric world, and that for so many thousands of years the woman was the symbol for spirituality, the goddess. And then with the coming of the Roman Empire, more emphasis was placed on the gods as male. And so today we have this male domination of the world, and yet there is this very important connection between male, female. Well, that's why you had temple prostitutes in the ancient world, because there's very important connections can be made between the act of sex and the psychological connection with God, some sort of a spiritual connection with God during the time of sex. And so that's, I think, very important to keep in mind, that probably these people at the top of the secret societies are, without a doubt, sexual perverts.
Justus, what would you say about another and very interesting secret society, namely the Skull and Bones? Because this is a secret society not of elderly men that have reached the 33rd or the 38th degree of Freemasonry, but these are young kids in the 21-year-old, the third year of college, that are initiated in that society. Have you heard of any homosexual overtones?
Oh yes, the initiation ceremony of Skull and Bones, which finally began to leak out after many years of total secrecy. The fact is that the initiate into Skull and Bones, first of all, he has to strip off all his clothing. Then he has to lie down in a coffin, and there he recites every sexual experience that he has had throughout his entire life, whether with male or female or what they did. And so this is in the presence of his brothers, you see, the fraternity brothers. So in other words, he is totally confessing all of his sexual activity of his life to that time, and they are now in possession of this knowledge so that they have not merely a weapon of blackmail, but a weapon of control, because whenever he sees one of his fraternity brothers around the campus, he knows that that brother knows all of his innermost secrets of his life. And in other words, you place yourself totally in their hands. And the Skull and Bones, of course, was set up by the Russell Trust in 1858 as a branch of the German Illuminati. And apparently this is also an Illuminati technique, probably developed by the Jesuits to force the initiate to place his personal history and all of his secrets in the hands of his fellow members. And then after this recitation of his personal secrets, he then stands up and is supposedly born again as a new person under the guise of the Illuminati Skull and Bones. And the members of this fraternity, by the way, there are other fraternities on Yale University, but it was generally known by the students there that Skull and Bones was the peak. In fact, a Yale student told me one day, he said, it was known on the campus that if you were tapped for bones, you were set for life. You would never have to worry about career or fortune because you would be taken care of. And only 15 seniors each year are tapped, you see.
Yeah.
And they are from the most elite families, the Harrimans, the Rockefellers, and the Bushes. His family was an employee of the Harriman interests, and so that's how Bush was chosen.
Families that have been for many generations into Satanism and black magic and secret societies.
Yes.
Also, there is a funny fact that when you are induced into the Skull and Bones, you basically lie naked in a coffin.
Yes.
Not only that you recite your past sexual exploits, but you lie naked in a coffin with a red ribbon tied around your lightning rod.
Oh, yes.
Also, I heard that they do something like a rush where everybody is naked and they kind of jump over and fall over and then pile upon this new inductee. And what goes on in the middle of this frenzied rush, I cannot say, but it looks like kind of a preparation for future Sodomic experiences. Plus another funny initiation rite that they have, you have to go and dig up a grave of a famous person and steal his skull. That's how the skull of Geronimo was stolen by one of the famous boners and brought to their shrine, which is a whole building in the middle of Yale University campus. The skull of another famous American, several Mexican revolutionary leaders were dug up and so on, which is, like a gory story from a horror movie. I mean, digging up a grave and taking out grisly bones in order to be initiated in a satanic society. If I use the language, the nomenclature of the communist totalitarian governments, basically, this is like a satanic Komsomol society, a youth satanic league, basically a preparation society, preparatory society, so that these members would rise much higher into the highest echelons of Freemasonry and the Illuminati. After that,
I think it's important right there to make the point that the Skull and Bones was a Freemasonic emblem. It is a Freemasonic emblem. It was always on the graves in Europe of high degree Freemasons. On their graves would be the skull and crossbones. It got even the pirates of the Caribbean, even the pirates would run the Jolly Roger, the black flag with the skull and bones.
Not only Freemasonic emblem, but I was reading a book on black magic, and there there was a photograph of a table set for satanic rituals,
Absolutely.
the daggers to kill the victim, and there was a skull and two femur bones in the very same exact geometrical position and shape as the emblems of the skull and bones.
Right.
And you know that in the language of symbology there is basically nothing coincidental, and that for me was a very strong indication that there may be some satanic overtones into that campus fraternity society. On top of that, all these strange voices that were coming through the locked doors of this temple, until somebody broke in the 70s, and in one of the rooms they discovered full regalia of Nazi flags, uniforms, swastikas, posters. Basically, it's obvious that on top of being with strong homosexual overtones and preparatory for satanic practices, it also practices Nazi elitist philosophy of the white elite.
Now, this particular area I'm not that familiar with, but I know that the introduction of perverted sex opens up it lowers one's inhibitions to start with, and then opens one up to further corruption. As we said before, that then one is not averse to maybe monetary corruption, and from there to lying to political corruption. And once you're into that lifestyle,
it's a short road.
Yeah, it's a very short road, and you know there's no coming back, because as Eustace brought out, all of your cohorts with you know what you have done, and that's the way that they can keep control over you.
Jordan, you mentioned something interesting about the G letter, the G force, the emblem on the Masonic shield.
The square in the compass has the G in the middle,
and the G stands for
many people thought the G stood for God. And then there were some who felt that the G stood for geometry, which had some basis for belief. But actually, if you go back, it goes all the way back to the generative force of sex, generating the generative force in nature.
In the generative organ, which is the male organ.
Which is the male organ, absolutely.
So that's why only men are admitted in Freemasonry,
yeah, well, it
supposedly.
has quite a bit to do with the superiority of sexual superiority of the male over the female. And as I said, that this goes back to the Roman Empire. These symbols and emblems were used.
And that's why the Mason carry these little aprons, because as this big curtain separates the holy altar in the tabernacle or the shrine from the place where the audience gathers, in the same way here this little apron, this little curtain in front separates the holy altar, the male generative symbol, from the uninitiated population.
No, that's exactly right. That is precisely what the symbolism is. It's the holy curtain that divides the male generative force from the uninformed, from the mundane. And sex has a very important
so basically the highest god, the highest altar that Freemasonry bows to is the male generative organ.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's why that emblem is put in stone in that obelisk in Washington.
D.C.
Funnily enough, in the middle of the Park of the Heroes fallen in the Bulgarian Revolution, in the fight against the capitalists and the fascists, in the middle of that park, on a hill overlooking whole Sofia in Bulgaria, that's my country, way back in Europe, in Eastern Europe, there is an obelisk that is a carbon copy of the Washington Monument, a carbon copy. And behind that obelisk, there is this square long lake, exactly a carbon copy of that lake, which is the symbol of the female vagina. So basically, these monuments were copied through Eastern European Freemasonry, which was the conspiracy behind communism in all of these Eastern European countries, all over Eastern Europe. I would like to go now into basically the relationship of sex, and especially homosexual sex, with mind control. But Jordan wants to add something.
Yeah, I want to add something in relation to the point that you were talking about Eastern Europe and communism. Are you aware of the fact that the communist symbol of the sickle, the hammer and the sickle, were in fact separate symbols? For thousands of years, the sickle was used in one way and the hammer in another. And only until the Communist Party did they put the configuration together, the two occult symbols.
And what was their meaning?
Well, the sickle represented Saturn. Saturn was the god of chaos, Kronos. And that's why even at the end of in New Year's, you have old man time, the old man, and then the baby crawling, which is the new year. And old man time is always hanging on to a sickle. Because old man time that we say goodbye to at the end of the year was the planet Saturn. Saturn was Kronos, or chaos, the old god of chaos who was leaving the old order and the coming new order, which would be the new year.
And how about the hammer? The hammer was the symbol of the order.
Well, and the hammer goes all the way back to the old hammer of Thor, which was the old Aryan hammer of Thor, which was used to reconstruct. You tear it down with the hammer and then you build up.
You tear it down with the sickle and you build up with the hammer.
Well, yeah.
So what I see here is a pictorial graphical expression of this same old satanic slogan of Ordo ab Chaos.
That's exactly right.
Order out of chaos. You hammer the order with a hammer that was created out of the chaos of the sickle.
That's right.
Fascinating.
The sickle is used to
Ordo ab Chaos.
And the hammer is to build a new order, so that's Ordo ab Chaos.
New world order out of the chaos of...
And let me make this point that Saturn was called Chaos. That was the name of a god, and that god is traced back to the planet Saturn.
Fascinating.
So that old man time at the end of the year is actually the planet Saturn, or chaos.
So let's go now into the connection between homosexual sodomic practices and mind control. What would you say, Justus, about let's say the certain research that was done by Wilhelm Reich in Germany and several others that you were mentioning on
Well, of course, Reich wrote The Function of the Orgasm, and I think that his understanding of the function of the orgasm was that it brought you into a relationship, not merely a sexual relationship, but a relationship of submission to control, a final submission that you would never rebel against anything, because once you've made this, actually given your body and your integrity, the integrity of your body, the sexual act is generally called, if it's not in the marital realm, is generally called a violation. You violate a child, you violate another person, and so by submitting to this violation, you sort of sacrifice yourself to the purposes of the order. It is a sacrificial gesture.
That's very interesting.
We were talking with Al Bilik about the mind control experiments that were going in the underground Montauk base, and he gave a fascinating rendition of the work of Wilhelm Reich, its connection in the American underground bases, work on mind control, with the previous work on mind control done by the SS in Germany, with a still previous work basically of sodomic mind control that is practiced by the black magic priestly cults of Tibet, would this be the red caps that engage in black magic as a contradistinction to white magic? But basically what the story is that when the student and the teacher engage in such a homosexual act, when the student is brought into a near orgasmic state, then certain pathways open between the subconscious of the student and the mind of the teacher, and then the mind and the teacher, who is already deep into black magic, and abuse of that personal freedom and personal right to choose your own destiny. The teacher enters into the subconscious and can do all these DOS commands of erase, delete, change on the mind, on the subconscious of the student. This is done in Tibet to impart certain higher types of knowledge directly from the teacher into the student. In exchange, in return, the teacher consumes of these higher classes of energies that are released at the time of the orgasm of the student. And basically, in these black right priesthoods, fornication goes on all day long. If there are girls around, fine. If there are no girls, boys. If there are no boys, all the animals in the courtyard. I mean, this is common practice there that
It is.
Yes.
makes no impression on anyone. These practices were used by the Germans, especially by Wilhelm Reich. I mean, the story is that in his laboratory, fornication was going on around the clock, and even here in the United States, he had special. I mean, his security guards were basically trained to shoot first and ask questions later, and especially any messengers from the FDA. But they were doing these experiments around the clock. What Wilhelm Reich discovered was, among the many things that he discovered, one of them was the orgone energy. And basically the orgone energy, this is the orgasmic energy, as I understand it. And through manipulation of that orgone energy, they later work on weather warfare, basically weather engineering for warfare purposes, creation of hurricanes, creation of storms, of tornadoes, of incredible power, with a machine as small and portable as an armchair, or probably in its biggest size as big and just a machine mountable on a truck. These photographs are very well known from the rare books by Wilhelm Reich that were expurged from the public libraries in the best Orwellian tradition. So back to the mind control, it was very convenient for the Germans, because in the SS they would indoctrinate the highest echelons of SS using these practices. And later on in the 50s and 60s, especially in the underground Montauk base where Al Bielek was working as an engineer, they would abduct boys, teenage boys from the streets of Long Island, put them in these underground dungeons, and I mean, most of these stories have been related to in our previous films. In the film by Preston Nichols, A Visit to the Montauk Base, they even found the cages where these boys were kept before sodomizing and mind controlling them, in not just changing some of their files, but basically completely erasing their JAWS directory and substituting it with a new one, with a totally new personality. And then these boys were supposedly sent forward in time, possibly to be the new perfect agents for the New World Order, let's say in the upcoming riots in Los Angeles. These were experiments done in the 50s and 60s. What a better way to create a perfect anonymous agent without any background. For these of us that have seen the French film La Femme Nikita, about the creation of such a perfect government agent from a lady that was sentenced to death, and the public was notified that the sentence has been carried out, but actually she was not killed and hidden in a special underground indoctrination and training center where she was turned into a total assassin. The Montauk Project was an even more precise and diabolical operation, because there dozens of boys were turned into totally mind-controlled individuals and sent forward in time. And these practices were done through mind control. Much, much later on, they developed electronic chairs where you would be brought electronically to this near orgasmic state, and then they would do the same mind control operations on you. So let's come back to the basic education of kids. I wouldn't be amazed that this high early introduction to homosexuality is meant not only to compromise the morals of the person, but also to prepare him for future mind control manipulation. Just as you were mentioning today, that basically in the English boarding schools, these were very accepted practices.
Well, that's true. And in fact, you always had the elites, the children of the elites were always subjected to these practices, because there again, it made them more amenable to carrying out the program. In other words, they would not be rebels, they would be people who would fit in. They would be trained to fit in. Because education, you see, is not merely imparting knowledge education is many things. It is training, and as you point out, it's also seduction. And in fact,
Corruption.
Seduction. I'm afraid education today is mostly seduction and corruption, and the imparting knowledge is a very minor part of it.
And brainwashing, basically. The fascinating film by the rock group The Who, The Wall, another brick in the wall, creating new bricks for the total wall, bricks by the millions, faceless bricks that are not different from any other one in this giant wall. Yeah, basically, I mean, these English boarding schools where most of the teachers were single, and it was accepted, basically.
And our American elite was trained in New England boarding schools, which essentially carried out the same practices as the English schools.
Or in all boys military academies, where these practices were carried even more so.
Definitely.
It's fascinating that such homosexual practices have been widely practiced in Japanese culture too. And even in the Japanese culture, they have a very well developed homosexual poetry and homosexual art. I mean, it is not paraded very much in public these days, but if you are a connoisseur of specialized Japanese art, you would be fascinated at the abundance or overabundance of homosexual poetry and paintings, which means that even there the elite has been basically quietly led into the ways, into the fold, by their secret societies, which, as usual, would have the emblem of the dragon, and we all know that the dragon is the symbol of the empire of independent angels. I don't want to call them fallen angels on this planet. So, what is the bottom line here of all these discussions? That basically mind control is practiced with all possible means. I mean, in 20th century, a lot of technical means have supplanted homosexuality. We have mind control frequencies beamed at us through the television sets, mind control frequencies piggybacked on the cellular system phone network, microwave frequencies beamed from special transmitters or orbiting satellites that directly resonate with cranial cavities and create the effect of hearing sounds or even obeying orders, basically totally controlling the individual. Microchip implantation for the purposes of monitoring and mind control. Basically, I think that Martin Cannon is one of the best researchers in the field of microchip implantation by the government, with his book The Controllers, which is also available to the public. Through Freedom of Information Act released documents, the CIA has had secret programs in microchip implantation into basically unwitting subjects. In the 50s and 60s, we're talking about 40 years of microchip implantation techniques. Microchips for mind control were available well before microchips were officially discovered for personal computers and bigger computers. So my feeling is that this is basically an evilarchy, as we were laughing with Eustace today, demonocracy.
It is a demonocracy, there's no question about it, and it is composed of elitists. In fact, I saw the term used in political magazines a few years ago at when some revelations were coming out of Washington about J. Edgar Hoover, who was not only a leading Mason, but also was a well-known homosexual. And the term home intern was in quite current use for some time. That, in other words, the world was instead of the Comintern of the communists, the world was being governed by the Homintern of the homosexual elitists, which really was not far off the mark. And that was only used for a short time and dropped out of sight, was never used again. But I thought
the Comintern.
I thought the Homintern was quite a very telling thing, and I guess it revealed too much because it was not in currency very long. Suddenly it was dropped, never mentioned again. I haven't heard that term in at least 10 years.
I think a very important writings was done about 20 years ago called The Religion of Revolution, in which the article was written by, I believe, Rushdoony, and out of Texas, and it was an exceptionally penetrating article about how homosexuality has been used, and sex in general, but especially homosexuality, has been used to prepare the human race to accept other things. And it was very well documented. It was a very interesting study, and it was called The Religion of Revolution. And it showed how sex was being used to prepare people to accept, as it said, the rape of the people and the rape on their minds, the rape on their freedom, and that sex was a very integral part of all of this.
Sex was used to prepare the people. I mean, what a better example to that than the heavy metal concerts that are used to prepare the young generation for the further acceptance of all these practices. Basically, why would one never find a violin or an harp as a musical instrument as part of a heavy metal band? Because I mean, these are instruments that basically resonate with the frequencies of the higher chakras, of the highest and basically the several top chakras. So they would be detrimental, counterproductive to a society that would like to stimulate the lower chakras of these lowest basic instincts. On the contrary, the drums and the heavy metal guitar, especially the bass guitar, resonate in the frequencies of the lowest chakra, of the groin chakra, of the sexual drive. So when thousands of kids get titillated to an ecstasy on a heavy metal rock concert, this is nothing more than a audio frequential acoustic massive masturbation, amplified by thousands of watts of acoustic power blasting from the speakers. I mean, there are very nice pieces even into heavy metal music, but I enjoy some of them. But what's important here is that as an overall package, the bottom line is that the heavy metal music does not enhance and elevate the vibrations of the highest chakras that would allow you to telepathically communicate with highest orders of intelligences in the universe. On the contrary, they basically titillate your most primitive basic sexual drives and instincts.
And there's another book that I think you should know about. It's called 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television by Jerry Mander. 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. And in there, he was the owner of the largest advertising agency in America, in San Francisco. And he basically in the book outlines how television has used, how it's put together, the mechanics of how television it was designed, how it's put together, and gets into the electronics of it, and then talks about how sex, he brings that point in about how sex is promoted through the television, and how the electromagnetic force field that is around you when the TV is on. It's a very interesting book, and it has a lot to do with what we're talking about here. You might want to try and find it, and it's still available in bookstores today.
I've been thinking for the last month or so, occasionally watching television here, this funny story with Michael Jackson, and with my typically conspiratorial, suspicious mind, what else can a mind be of somebody having the professional or cultural deformation of Eastern European totalitarian communist country? But anyway, I was thinking, well, what the hell would the family be that would give its child to spend a night or a few nights or even on a regular basis, regardless of what the amount of money is that they get paid for doing that? And I was thinking, could it be that there is some bigger story behind this superficial story we are getting in the media? Could it be that these could be families that all belong to the same satanic society, and that they are giving their kids to be initiated, to be brought in the fold, so to speak, at an early age, because the younger you start, the earlier you start on your career with the basically the young communist league, I mean the corruption of the mind in Eastern Europe, the primary school communist league, then the secondary school communist league, the pioneers, the high school communist league, which is the Komsomol. The younger you start in this field, the earlier you can get into the Communist Party, which is the springboard. Every one of this is a springboard for the next, and once you are in the Communist Party, you are assured a pretty good position. So in a similar vein, parents of such ambitious and corrupt parents that have been in the fold themselves for a long time, they probably bring out their kids to be initiated. What's your feeling about that, Houston?
Oh, I'm quite sure that this is a factor, and I think this may be going on a lot more in the movie and television industry than we realize, that the families now use, I think the case of the Menendez brothers also brings in some of this, because he was an important figure in the entertainment industry. And so why were these two sons apparently being inculcated into these practices? It could very well have been a vocational program that he was inducting them in.
Absolutely so. And I mean, the whole pattern, I mean, the whole personality of the father of the Menendez boys, an extremely ambitious, overly ambitious individual that started from nothing and rose quickly into that industry. I wouldn't be amazed that the fastest way, the fastest and strongest springboard to rise into the secret societies in the world would be probably to be a member of a satanic cult, which is the innermost core, the innermost circle of a secret society. What's your feeling on that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, you know, they have something in Hollywood. Well, let me go back and say this, that the old Celtic or Celtic magicians in England, the old Druid priest, the magicians, always worked their magic with magic wands. And magic wands were always made out of holly wood. And today, we still have Hollywood being used to work their magic on us. And I think it's interesting that when you get into the symbolism in Hollywood, there's something called death head colors in Hollywood. And that is, every time there is to be a rape or a violation of a human being, and especially a death, there will be certain colors which will always come up, and certain symbols are worked into the picture, so that subconsciously the subconscious mind picks up these colors and symbols every time there's to be a rape or a death. And around Hollywood it's called the death head colors and death head scenes. And so they're still working their magic on us in Hollywood today. A lot of
what's your feeling, Eustace, on the Satanism in Hollywood, basically black magic and Satanism?
Well, I think that Satanism definitely is a factor in Hollywood, because first of all, you've got mass media, mass communications here, which means you reach the entire population. So if there's any place that Satanism would want to have an outlet, it would be here.
Absolutely. No doubt about that.
Yes.
I mean, so many of the films that, I mean, forget about the horror movies, which are not only clear, pure satanic rituals, many of them, but I've even heard stories that the film crew and cast would do a black mass every morning before the beginning of the shooting of such a film.
You know, Merv Griffin a few years ago had on William Blatterly, who was the author of The Exorcist, and he was also the director of the movie The Exorcist. And it was interesting that when Merv Griffin asked him, where did you get all of this material on Satanism and devil worship and all that kind of scary stuff in the movie? And he said, well, I worked for the mind control department of the CIA for many years.
Right.
And he says, and the CIA is definitely up to speed on all of this because they use this throughout the world. And another important, well, I don't suppose I should bring that up, but it was on Merv Griffin's show, so I will. Merv Griffin asked him, he said, well, there was someone else that worked in the mind control department of the CIA at the same time you were there. He says, would you like to comment on him? And he said, yes, L. Ron Hubbard was also indoctrinated in this kind of thinking too, and so I
Fascinating.
find that to be interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I've heard stories that the Monroe, what was his first name? The Monroe.
Bob Monroe.
The Monroe guy of Monroe Institute was also
Institute, yeah.
was also a member of the same department with the CIA. It's a very interesting line by Standeo in his book The Cosmic Conspiracy about the infiltration of the intelligence organizations on both sides of the ocean, on both sides of the curtain, so to speak, by secret societies, that basically the empire of independent angels works in the very same pattern. If you know the workings of inside the KGB, these secret societies within the secret society within the secret society, you would know what is going on here in the United States. There is a fascinating film, actually two films that we produced early. One of them came from Germany, UFO Secrets of the Third Reich, where they give the whole backbone structure of secret societies that gave the rise of the Third Reich. Half a dozen people were more influential into bringing the Third Reich upon the heads of the German population and all these casualties that were its result, and on all of Europe and the world than anybody else in Germany. The Knights Templar branch for Germany, the Tempelhof Gesellschaft, organized the Thule Society in 1919. Later on, they organized the Vril Secret Research Society. They started with anti-gravity research in the late 20s. They organized the SS part, the National Socialist Party, to carry on their policies in the broader German population for the creation of a new world order, the new order, the Neues Ordnung that Hitler was talking about, and for the preparation of the coming of the new age. In 1919, the Thule Society was founded for that very same purpose, to prepare the German society for the coming of the new age. I mean, this is 60 years before the new age became a catchword in California. But this whole secret society within a secret society within a secret society, I mean, this whole system was carried on in Germany. Within the National Socialist Party was founded the SS as an even more secretive organization than the party itself. Within the SS, later on, they founded the super secret society, the Black Sun. And I think the members of the highest echelons of the SS were also members of the Black Sun. So in their special castle, I forgot the German city.
Yes, I forgot the name of the castle.
Babelsberg. Oh, they had a very special SS castle that was built over a greatly renovated and enlarged medieval castle.
Right.
But they had an underground round chamber with 12 seats, the usual 12 number, which was their secret chamber for probably satanic and Sodomic practices.
Right.
And according to Standeo, to come back to his book Cosmic Conspiracy, I mean, this is the pattern of the Luciferian presence on the planet to control the secret societies at the very elite. I mean, the intelligence organizations through these secret societies. Also, these stories that I heard recently about an interesting sect within the KGB, the so-called castrati, a secret society where the ritual castrations of the initiation of the black and bones into the skull and bones society here, which is a red ribbon tied around the phallus, there is carried to the end, and these people are actually castrated, which gives the typical facial expression of a lot of the KGB high members of the 30s and 40s. So we have the same practices over and over and over, but all they are meant for control of the corresponding secret society and the overall organization into which this society is embedded. Let's come back to basically the education in schools and how the New World Order is preparing to bring down these practices into the public educational system. I mean, your upcoming book, Eustace, is fascinating to this, and that's probably one of the most interesting books to hit the American book market in many years.
Well, I think so. And you see, supposedly they're bringing all these practices into the schools to be taught to the children under the guise of sex education. In other words, why shouldn't a child know the difference between male and female and what the roles of the two sexes are? But in fact, the educational system is doing exactly opposite. They're ignoring the traditional roles of male and female to our children, and I'm talking about 6-year-olds, 6 to 8 years old, are being asked to not only be tolerant of sexual deviation, but that even at that age, they really should start thinking very seriously about whether they want to be a normal person or whether they want to be a sexual deviate themselves. In other words, they're being challenged to accept homosexuality when they're 6 years old, and this is not a primary concern of the average 6 years old.
Absolutely, and especially keeping in mind that homosexuality is not 10% of the population, as is the myth, but
No,
it's
very small.
a lot less.
So what they're actually doing also is to, because homosexuals don't reproduce, they have to constantly be recruiting new members, or otherwise the practice could die out altogether.
But that's fascinating, because that's another population reduction policy out of the large number of such policies that they have. From the designer diseases and designer viruses that are coming non-stop from their assembly line of the labs at Fort Detrick and many other places, to the encouragement of working for both parents so that they cannot produce 6 or a dozen children as the American family would do just maybe 50 years earlier, but just 1 or 2 children. Encouragement of lesbianism and homosexuality to reduce the population.
Yes, very much so.
I mean, the kid of my friends was asked in high school a long questionnaire about homosexuality, and the bottom line of it was that if they had any problem figuring out on which side of the divider line they were, they should go and talk to their homosexual teacher about getting enlightenment. And the very end of the questionnaire was basically that you should not discuss these things with your parents.
Oh yes, very much so.
Which enraged the parents themselves.
Well, the parents, you see, hope that their children will be normal and that they will marry and have children themselves, so they have grandchildren. But you see, the homosexual recruitment cuts that off. Not only population reduction, also the breakdown of the family, which is a very important part of behaviorism.
Still I've been thinking, I mean, it's so fascinating to put under a common denominator the stories around Michael Jackson, the stories about the Menendez brothers, with a recent story that I heard from some friends about very interesting summer camps, that a weekend of 2 days in this summer camp for kids may cost up to $25,000. And what do the elite children get in such a camp? That costs a fortune for almost a yearly, the median yearly income for an American family of 4 was $22,000 just about 5 years ago. Now it may be $25,000. So basically a median yearly income goes into a 2-day education. I was told that these are camps where the kids of the overly ambitious parents would be taught in an early age to acquire a split personality.
Oh.
They would get a 6 to 10-year-old child and immerse the child in an underground pit, naked. The child is totally naked, underground pit full of beetles, non-venomous beetles and insects, large beetles, but so frightful to the kid that basically the kids go in hyperspace. They immediately get out of the body, and this is the point in time where certain demonic entities, certain spirits, enter into them, forming this split personality. Do you have any comments on such practices?
Well, the bring about of MPD, the multiple personality disorder, in children, I think is a very important part of the educational system today, and the homosexual practices are an important part of inculcating MPD in a child because, you see, psychologists know that for a normal, healthy child, there is a period of sexual latency from the age of 6 to about 16 where you do not have overt sexual activity with anyone else, particularly with adults. And that when this happens, you actually sort of burst the child's cocoon, the protective cocoon, in which its personality is developing. In other words, you penetrate that, and that's why it's called penetration. And once that is penetrated, you open the way for the child to develop multiple personalities and to become a much easier and more controllable subject of the world order state. And there's no question that this is a definite political program that they're following, that the sex education in the schools is dedicated to this, not only to the breakdown of the family, but to producing an almost new class of robot-like citizens who will grow up never to question authority, never to rebel, because you see...
As much as a child in a satanic cult would question authority, as much they would question authority.
And so this is definitely part of the program to create what they call a new citizen, a new type of citizen who will never really represent a threat to the new order.
Fascinating stories. Basically, I wouldn't be amazed that split personality in satanic cults is not a byproduct of the activity of the satanic cults. It may be the prime objective of these cults to create new upcoming members, the new generation, from whose ranks the future elite members, the future basically leaders of this demonocracy, of this society under extremely heavy Luciferian influence would be chosen. And I mean, stories coming from the secret underground laboratories and projects that have sprung by the hundreds, maybe even by the thousands all over the country. Basically, split personalities created in the employees there. An engineer will have two personalities. So personality A works in the above ground, not so secretive project from 9 to 1, let's say. Then they switch to personality B. He takes the elevator downstairs and goes into the super secret underground establishment. When the time comes for him to leave, he switches back to personality A. So he never even realizes that 4 hours of his day are missing and that he would spend them somewhere else. Somebody was joking that, well, I'm sure he won't be getting 2 paychecks, but he will be getting 2 tax returns at the end of the year.
Well, you know, Vladimir, this all brings us to a very important point also, that what we are seeing is a complete change in the ultimate goals of the educational system. Now, before, in the United States, which we had, say, up till 1945, the educational system was supposed to bring out the individual personality of the child, to prepare him for leadership, for a creative life. But today, the educational system has abandoned that goal entirely, and its sole purpose is to produce conformists,
Faceless robots.
faceless robots. And of course, the split personality is part of achieving this, and the homosexual practices is part of this. And so we actually have seen a tremendous makeover of the educational system, and I think I'm the first person to point this out. That is, over the overall picture. I mean, people have been focusing on individual aspects of this and becoming alarmed about it all over the United States in recent years. That's one reason you've got the homeschooling development, and you've got other reactions.
Private Christian schools and so on.
Private Christian schools, because the parents realize something very bad is happening to their children, and they're trying to save them. But until they see the whole picture, they cannot do much to correct the situation.
Absolutely. And what I see, the bottom line is a slow, general moving away from the Christian principles and morals into the Luciferian, Lucifero-satanic principles and morals.
Oh, it is Luciferian, no question about it.
Well, something that you mentioned, Eustace, I think is very important when you talked about how the concept of a new man or a new person being developed.
Well, that was also the communist goal, to produce
That's
a new
exactly
man.
right,
Yes.
the new man.
Yeah.
And I was at Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara.
Center for
years ago.
Humanistic Studies, probably.
Well, no, I was up there for about a week going through all of the documents on mind control that was being used by communists at the time, reference works, but there was one article there in the California State document on how the terms that were being used and developed for the new citizen that will inhabit the new world order. And they kept referring to the young people as the new man, the new creature, the new individual, and the new society. And the whole emphasis is that you must get away from the human feelings, human emotions, the desire for love and to
warmth
care for
and happiness and togetherness.
Right, and get away from that. You must have what is called the new man.
Yes.
And they even brought out in the article how names have been developed in the past 100 years, like New Man as a name, like Paul Newman
Oh, yes. Paul.
and New Man, and they have been developing names purposely
To introduce the concept.
Yeah, right.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
I still have those documents that I photocopied
The film
years ago.
Boys from Brazil is a beautiful film about these secret. Here we are entering into genetic research, into human genetic research, into cloning of human beings. In the film Boys from Brazil, these were biological clones that were cloned from.
But that's not a new concept. As far back as the 40s, what's his name? Charles Lawton was starred in a movie called Island of Lost Souls. Then in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, Burt Lancaster played in a movie called Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yes.
There have been...
which is a book based on a book by H.G. Wells, which came out in the 1890s, early 1900s, which was, I mean, that's probably would be another fascinating interview about the human genetic research that has been going on. But all of these indoctrination methods, for example, what they bring out is, what was the name of this Vulcan member of the Star Trek 1, the old Star Trek? What was the name of this alien Vulcan?
Oh, you're talking about Mr. Spock.
Yeah, Mr. Spock, yeah, Mr. Spock. Why is, in what way is Mr. Spock different from the human beings? In the way that he has no emotions.
And only pure logic.
Only pure logic. Basically, he is as logical as a computer and as emotional as a brick.
Exactly.
And this is exactly the new men, the brave new boys of the new republic that H.G. Wells wrote about. Actually, it's a fascinating quote in his 1902 treatise of basic impacts of science on society and social progress.
And who was it? Was it Aldous Huxley that wrote Brave New World?
Exactly.
In which he talked about how young people were going to be traumatized and prepared to go into a new order of the world,
Exactly.
in which there would be no more human emotions, no more family ties, nothing to do with anything, because when you're dealing with human emotions and human feelings for a child, for other people, it is very difficult to control that kind of a mentality.
Not only that, but human emotions. What is the strongest of all human emotions?
It's love.
Love. And basically, if you can bottom line the whole Christian message, the whole message of Jesus Christ during his life on the planet, it can be bottom line with one single word: love. So basically, the word love is like anathema to the empire of fallen angels, and they would like to do everything possible to get our society as further away from the condition of love as they can. So Mr. Spock is the excellent individual. So in these programs, there is well, not a very young boy by now, but a young gentleman that was educated in these boys from Brazil type of New World Order secret academy somewhere in the Brazilian jungles, Jefferson Souza, who is an extremely, or Sosa, Jefferson Sosa, who is an extremely strong psychic, according to Albilic. He was able to even pinpoint and trace his multiple goings back and forth in time, and his implantation of his soul into the new baby, which are other bizarre technologies, not of genetic human engineering, but of soul engineering, which we would probably discuss in a further future film. But this strong psychic boy had a very interesting childhood. He was raised in a farm totally void of any and every human contact, living in an isolated room where food would be brought on a tray through the input window, and the output would be taken out through the toilet or the output window, and that's it. No human control of any kind, no sound, no nothing. And the only contact with the outside world would be through television screens. So basically these are boys educated by machines. And the purpose of this program is to get rid of the emotions, to get rid of that most dreadful of the human conditions, the condition of love.
And in relation to that, the movies back in the 40s, the Tarzan movies, if you'll remember, the article I was telling you about in Santa Barbara brought out how the motion pictures of Tarzan movies was to glorify the glorified savage, to take man and the entire human race and go back to the jungle and to live like the what they called the glorified savage, and that the modern day civilization based on Christianity was to be shunned, and that the
abolished,
was to go back to the jungle to live like Tarzan.
Well, that was Rousseau's Noble Savage, you know.
Yeah, the Noble Savage.
Back to nature.
Back to nature, which was a very important philosophical concept, and which I think immediately preceded the French Revolution.
And basically, I wouldn't be amazed that Rousseau was a major luminary and a major thinker of the Illuminati.
Well, that's what the actual records say, that he was an ideologue, a major
ideologue, as was Plato. I mean, through his major work, The Republic, which basically laid the foundation from all future political developments on the planet away from monarchism and into republicanism, which is the Luciferian way of social management, unlike monarchism, which is the Trinitarian way of social management.
You see, the most important thing you need to remember in relation to mind control is the one thing that the people who are running this world from behind the scenes, the one thing that they are most concerned about and that frightens them is human individuality and human creativity, the human being as it was designed by God to be free and to exercise all of the human emotions, to protect oneself and one's family, and to look after the human race as a whole. This is the one thing the conspiracy cannot deal with, and they want to do away with is anything that has to do with human emotions or human family, and mechanize the human race in order that we shall all be able to operate together as a machine in the new world order without any human emotions, so that if someone is taken out one night and dealt with by the government, that everyone will just go to work the next morning and just do what they're told. And I think that this thing that happened in Waco, Texas, is a classic example of how well we have been prepared, because we sat in television and watched human beings in our country, in America, die in front of our eyes, and it was not a movie. This was actual life and death situation. And then everyone got up the next morning and went to work, and
nobody said nothing.
No one said much about anything.
They were an ugly cult engaging in child abuse.
And never even considered that they were, no matter what religion they were human beings in America that died in front of you, and no one did anything.
I hit upon a very interesting book, a book called I Am Lucifer. At the introduction to that book, the author claims that he was traveling on a train in Italy one day, fell asleep, and suddenly Comrade Lucifer started talking to him and basically gave him some, not memoirs, but condensed version of his viewpoint of history of the last 2,000-3,000 years. And in several occasions in that book, there were very interesting passages where it was said that Lucifer, I mean, a narration coming from Comrade Lucifer himself, and saying that, well, I cannot understand it, this human emotion of love, and I cannot stand it, and basically I'm getting the goosebumps from it. Such a revulsion, such a negative attitude, and at the same time you feel that this is a steely mind, a steely heart, without any emotion, without any compassion, without any warmth. So it's very interesting in the yin and yang universe of competing and parallelly existing opposite beginnings, how the infinite love of Christ is confronted with the infinite coldness and steeliness of Comrade Lucifer, and how this bottom line, I mean, there is a tremendous effort, what tremendous effort there exists to introduce this bottom line of lack of compassion and love into the public education.
In relation to the subject we're talking about, there was a movie. I would suggest everyone get a copy, to rent a copy of the movie and watch it. It's called Network. It's about 15 years old, and it was called Network. And in it, the head of the network, the president or chairman of the board, talks with the offending newscaster, and in it is probably one of the most concise discussions of the Illuminati's plans for the world that I've ever seen in a movie. It's just incredible. Where the head of the network tells him, the newscaster, that we have been planning this new order, this new world that's coming, where men will be automatrons, there'll be robots, there will be no more troubles like we have here with individuality and personalities. All human creatures will be working for one goal, the goal of the new order, and it's just a fascinating explanation for what these people have in mind for the world. I'd suggest highly that you get the movie Network and watch those scenes in it. And incidentally, in that movie, also at the very end of the movie, the newscaster says to the audience on television, he said, well, don't worry about America being destroyed, because we are the goose that lays the golden egg. So we're going to be here because we have to be here to feed everyone. And he says, so you're not going to see the end of America, you're not going to see the end of the world, but what you are going to see is the end of individuality, human creativity, and the individual human being. That's what you're going to see the end of. That's what we have now. No longer will there be the individual creative personality. We're all going to live in a new order, in a new world, where there will be no more individuality, no more human emotions at all.
You will be amazed in how many science fiction stories or films the idea about implantation of microchips in the mind of a person so as to obtain a total control, so as basically that every step would be known to the elite, every word said, and when they decide to pull the master switch, then you would become an obedient performer of their orders and their agenda. I mean, these are not just science fictional ideas coming in the mind of authors, but these are scenarios and agendas that have been played out and that have been developed by hired luminaries in the scientific field in the very same way that, let's say, the report of the Iron Mountain was generated, hiring with unlimited budget for 3 years Nobel laureates and the best of the best in 20 different academic fields. There are stories, rumors that basically what Orwell wrote in his book 1984 was not a prophetic warning to the citizens of this planet, but it was basically another of the numerous Illuminati blueprints and agendas for a future society, where through these constant low-intensity nuclear wars, the population would be kept low, and a small handful of elite, ruling elite, would run the whole world. I mean, these are the most frightening of the scenarios prepared by the most frightening of the numerous factions of the independent angels being on the planet, namely the factions that are very deep into the occult and black magic, which is disregard of individual freedom and total interference with the mind of the subject.
Well, a few moments ago, we talked about H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells also wrote another book at the turn of the century called The Time Machine. And in the movie The Time Machine, you should get that movie and rent it and watch it, because that is a real experience. The story shows how in the New World Order, all people are totally devoid of anything, no emotions, no individuality. Everyone is totally controlled, and at a certain time of day, the buzzers go off, the sirens go off, and everyone stops what they're doing, and they go back up to the mountain, to the holy mountain, and there's just absolutely total control over all peoples. And the name of the movie was The Time Machine. And you really should get that and watch it, because H.G. Wells wrote that at the turn of the century. He knew what he was talking about, because he was a very important member in the Fabian Society. And the Fabian Society, of course, was an organization set up in England with the help of Lord Milner and Rothschild Moneys and Cecil Rhodes to prepare the entire world for a coming communistic, socialistic world, but not on the Soviet model, but that communism and socialism could be infiltrated into the thinking of people in the Western world. And so I highly recommend both of those movies.
What's your feeling on the Fabian Society? What do you think?
Well, the Fabian Society is a very important part of the World Socialist movement. In fact, we have a supposedly hard-right, ultra-conservative group in this country called the Heritage Foundation, founded by the Coors beer fortune, which is actually run by a Fabian socialist from England named Stuart Butler. And you see Stuart Butler appear on programs supposedly espousing capitalistic, free American enterprise ideals, when in fact he is herding the American conservatives into Fabian socialist directives.
I mean, so many leading socialists in Europe were members, overt or covert members of the Fabian Society, that basically it has been the hotbed of not only British but European and global socialism and communism.
And it was one of the symbols of the socialist movement for many, many years, still used today, is the red rose. And I have many, many pictures in color of very famous communist and socialist leaders, many communist leaders and socialist leaders wearing the red rose, and Castro and all the hierarchy of the Soviet government.
All the Soviet, all the Eastern European, I mean, it's a very important symbol of
Right.
all May Day, May 1st celebrations.
Right. But in the New Time magazine for January 19th of this year, 1994, there is a color picture of the new President Clinton looking at the Oval Office, and in his left hand is a red rose. And I thought that was very significant. Why would the President pose for a picture holding a red rose? And so there's a message there. You better do your homework on Clinton and the White House, and you better find out why that it's called the White House,
Yes.
and why England is ruled from something called Whitehall.
And why the Russian center of power is called
It's called the White House.
also the White House.
Oh, yeah.
And the Russian colors, the new color for the new federation is red, white, and blue. And the new symbol on the national coat of arms is the double-headed eagle of Freemasonry.
So this white of the White Houses all over the world is basically the white of the white magic.
Oh, well, and it goes back to Whitehall, as I said, in England. And the word hall is profoundly important because you have the Union Hall, the Lodge Hall, the Masonic Hall, Juvenile Hall, City Hall, the Hall of Records. This all goes back to the old ancient Hall of the Initiates in Egypt, from which the Freemasons took that term hall, and today we have Whitehall, or the Hall of Justice, and City Hall, Town Hall, etc. So what we're having here, what we've got here, is a very highly tuned, well-organized, and highly financed world conspiratorial apparatus operating with black magic, occultism, secret societies, and fraternal orders, and it just boggles the mind of most people who are not aware of this as to how far along the human race is toward the end of the human race.
As
and
we
the
know it.
coming of an inhuman new order.
And even commercials about carpooling these days on television, where they have these faceless, endless streams of people without any expression, without any love and feeling, marching slowly toward downtown, resembles very much the very same faceless Roboton movements of workers going deep underground into their squalid living quarters in the famous silent film of the 30s, Metropolis, which is one of the most fascinating films about another possible Illuminati blueprint for a future society.
Yes.
Let's leave the elite to live on the surface of the planet, and all the other robotized workers would be living deep underground amid lack of light and abominable conditions. Or another film to that end, which is Brazil. This is one of the most fascinating films. Actually, I find these films, Metropolis, 1984, and Brazil, among the most important films
Yes.
about what a totalitarian society would look like. And anyone who would like to get an idea of what the New World Order would be should get and watch these films in succession, and then discuss them at home with the whole family, because
And
these are incredible films.
incidentally, there's another one you don't want to miss. It was made in 1939 it came out. 1939, I believe, called Things to Come, another book written by H.G. Wells. The book Things to Come was made into a movie, and Michael Rainey was the star. And in it, it shows the world after two major world wars, and a new group of people, men, come in to rule the world. And Michael Rainey is the leader of this new group of men who are to rule the world. And in the movie, you can rent it. It's called Things to Come. Michael Rainey says, "We are the Freemasons of the New World Order. We are the Masonic leaders of the New World, and we are bringing a new order to the earth." and one of the kings says, "I've heard about your conspiracy, and I don't want anything to do with it." And Michael Rainey says that we are the power behind the thrones of the world. We are the Freemasons of the New Order. I think that is very significant. Back in 1939,
Oh, yes.
Freemasonry bringing a new world order. The movie is Things to Come. You can rent it in any...
Fascinating stories. I think that we should backtrack to almost the very beginning of this discussion, because we missed few very important developments, actually two important developments in this country, and I would like also our friend present here to give his opinion on these cases. But one is the McMartin child molestation case. What's your feeling about that case, Eustace?
Well, I'm quite sure that this is part of the conspiracy to violate the children and to make them susceptible to split personality, multiple personality disorder, in order to make them robotic slaves of the New World Order.
Is it also possible that since everyone seemed to have been found to be innocent, that there could have been also a plan to put it into the minds of the people that when children talk about their molestation, that most likely it just didn't happen, and that the people are being accused are actually innocent, as the McMartin people were found to be innocent, and that maybe we shouldn't be worrying that much about this whole subject.
Well, I think there was a very definite program to educate the public, or make the public believe that there have been other cases also in which people were convicted on these charges of child abuse at these daycare centers, and then were later found to be innocent and pardoned. So I think there has been a long, ongoing campaign to convince the public that when children talk about these things, that it's just a childhood fantasy, and you don't have to pay attention to them. And I think the media has done a great job in bringing this to the American public to make them believe that the children have overwrought imaginations, nothing really happens.
I felt the same
because
thing.
a lot of the media moguls are the very consumers of these children that are supplied to them for sexual purposes.
Definitely. And there is a nationwide ring of child prostitution. It's been exposed in a number of publications. Leading bankers, politicians, George Bush is mentioned in one, the famous Omaha case, which you may have heard of.
Nebraska, Omaha, the Lincoln Savings and Loan. Yeah, basically the McMartin molestation case, according to Ted Gunderson, and Ted has been the FBI chief for Los Angeles for how many years? Maybe
quite a few years.
Close to a dozen years. And after he retired, he's been investigating in his free time ritual child abuse and human sacrifices by satanic cults for all these years after that. More than 10 years now, by the way, and he is probably the leading authority in this country on ritual child abuse. And according to his words, the McMartin child molestation case was not an isolated case. On the contrary, there were up to half a dozen such cases all over the country. And if the parents of these abused children were only to unite, and there was a large enough legal base to start a class action suit against the government. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, but basically to start a class action suit against the government for the government inactivity, for doing nothing against these organized and extremely powerful, very well funded. I mean, after all, so many elite politicians and bankers are the consumers of these children.
Oh, yes.
To start a class action suit against the government for total inactivity in this field. And so what were you saying, Eustace? That basically a whole tunnel was discovered there under the kindergarten.
The discovery of the tunnel verified some of the supposedly wild fantasies of the children about going into a tunnel and seeing sacrifices done and so forth. And they claimed no tunnel existed. Well, then they found a tunnel, which really substantiated a lot of the charges the children had made.
And not only that, but this tunnel was connecting the uh, what is it, the daycare center with the nearby building, so that the children would be moved quietly to the building, and from that building they would be loaded into limousines with dark windows and taken to the politicians all over town.
Yes, that's right.
And this is not an isolated case. On the contrary, this is the pattern that exists all over the country. And to make sure that even if the trio or how many of the defendants there were would be convicted, to make sure that these convictions would be overturned, the lady lawyer the prosecutor who was basically trying them, it turns out that she was also a graduate from that very same McMartin preschool.
Yes.
So then she would be easily implicated as being involved personally in the case,
Definitely.
as being not impartial, being biased, and the judgment could have been easily overthrown. So basically, very, very cleverly, they did a precautionary measure there in case everything else fails.
Yes.
And I mean, this is a pattern that goes on all over the country. Not only small children were taken for sexual gratification to the elite, but what was the other story in Omaha? The Omaha savings and loans, the Omaha, Nebraska.
Lincoln Savings.
The Lincoln, the Lincoln Savings
The
and
Larry
Loan.
King case.
That Larry King was supplying young boys to the politicians in Washington.
Oh, yes. That's absolutely true. And in fact, you find this, that no matter where these things are going on, Los Angeles or Omaha, there's always a link back to Washington. And this again goes back to the home intern, which I mentioned earlier, the homosexual elite, which is running this country and probably much of the world.
One of the now young gentlemen who was a teenager while abused by the scout gave in his court documents the story how he was taken to a wild sexual orgy, locked in a cage, and among other wild things that he was forced to do, at the very end he was forced to fornicate with a corpse of a dead man through the bars of the cage. Probably somebody who was already slain and made a sacrifice.
Oh, yes.
In the wild orgy.
Yes.
And somebody even mentioned that a lot of these boys would be later killed so as not to be witnesses to having these liaisons with leading politicians.
Certainly.
And probably killed in a very sophisticated ritual abuse, child satanic ceremony.
Yes.
I think we should also clarify that when we talk about Larry King, we're not talking about the radio talk show host Larry King. We're talking about an individual that was involved with that particular bank in Nebraska who happened to be named there.
Savings and loans, a sleazy individual.
Yeah. But
who was
it just
one
so
of the
happened that his name happened to be Larry King also.
who was one of the main purveyors of child prostitution, and basically he ran a child prostitution ring for the elite in Washington. Somebody also told me that they do these regular retreats, the elite does. Where was this summer retreat?
Well, you're talking about the Bohemian Society.
Tell us something about the Bohemians and the Bohemian Moors and the very word Bohemian, and what does the Bohemian Grove mean?
Well, Bohemian, in the way in which they are using it, is similar in which the way it has been used, but it's got a little different slant to it. Originally, Bohemian simply meant someone who was like an artist, or a poet, someone who lived the life of an artist that was not the same as the normal person that lives today.
Poor intellectual.
And so it was kind of like the community of artists and intellectuals, and so that was a bohemian. However, the Bohemian Society that meets in Northern California in the last 2 weeks of July, they have even explained in their own literature what they mean by the word bohemian. They have said that their understanding of bohemian is people who do not live by the same moral or ethical standards as the rest of the human race, people who do not live by the same laws and ethical standards. And so if you understand that the Bohemian Society is made up of all of our living presidents, all of the top leaders in this country, and they are openly saying that they do not live by the same laws and regulations and morality that you do. That's the Bohemian Society that meets once a year in Northern California.
For how long do they meet?
For 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks of July.
What do they do in all these 2 weeks?
Well, they supposedly are there able to put down their differences and be one organization, so that leaders of the different individual political parties, even from Europe, supposedly enemies, can go there and for 2 weeks not be enemies any longer, and they can discuss the events of the day and be able to roam freely, and of course you have to know there's going to be sexual orgies and all kinds of things going on there.
You think so?
Oh, I'm totally positive of it.
Yeah, they're totally isolated, and also they've come under fire because women are complaining they're excluded from this.
Yes.
These are the business and political leaders of the Western world, and women claim under equality they should be allowed to participate, and it's interfering with their careers and so forth. So there are several aspects, and also the fact that it's called a grove, and of course this goes back to the groves.
Grove worship, yeah.
Grove worship of ancient Babylon, where the bodies of, where the pieces of the body of Nimrod were hidden, and
in a grove.
In a grove, and so the grove itself has deep Freemasonic significance.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Well,
Very much so.
basically it's the antipode of the temple worship, because the temples in these societies, especially in the Western society, these are the Christian temples.
Yeah.
In a Christian temple, you worship in the middle of the day, in broad daylight, open ceremony, open to everyone, every member of that society. But in a grove worship, you practice out of sight of the temple, actually outside of the city, hidden deep in the grove, at night, at midnight, invitation only, closed secret society. So it is exactly the diametrically opposite image and procedure to the Christian ceremony.
Oh, it's a pagan ceremony, definitely.
No doubt about it. And the grove also directly is connected to the Bohemian Grove. The word grove is directly connected to the old Celtic or Celtic magicians, as I said, in England, the Druids, because the Druids were the worshippers in the groves. And so that's a very important term, grove worship.
Fascinating thing. How about these Bilderberger meetings that happen once a year? The world leaders there, would they engage in special practices? Because
well, I think you are not allowed to be a part of this elite hierarchy unless you have proven yourself. They never allow a decent human being to be in their company. That would be absolutely suicide to allow a human being or a decent man to be in their company, because these people are all perverts. How could they possibly allow a good man to be a part of their organization?
How could they possibly allow somebody with a face of a saint to be among them? I mean, he would be the black sheep of the crowd.
Absolutely not.
With all these demonic expressions on their faces.
Absolutely.
Imagine the most fascinating face that I saw just recently on television. The director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I was mesmerized by his eyes. I've never seen such an eyes through my wanderings on 3 continents. I've never seen more nocturnal eyes of a midnightly creature. I mean, actually somebody told him about the eyes, because at the end of the day he was looking down as if reading from something and never even looked up to face the camera. I mean, this was the kick of my day. I mean, I've never seen a person with more demonical eyes. But then you think about, well, this would be the guy, the real Tsar of this country when they suspend the constitution, and he will be the one to marshal thousands in the concentration camps and into the population elimination centers of the New World Order. I mean, you have to have the proper individual for this post.
And again, I will have to say that there's another movie that you need to see that Robert Duvall played in. It couldn't be made in this country. It was filmed in Canada, and it's called Handmaid's Tale. Handmaid's Tale was filmed in Canada a couple of years ago. Robert Duvall, as I said, was one of the stars. And the story is basically America in the New World Order. And the symbol for the new government of America is the triangle with the eye on top of the pyramid. And it has all together to do with America and the New Order. And it shows vast concentration camps and people who are dissidents and people who do not fit into the New Order are being carted away in trucks, in double semi-trucks, and taken out to be removed and to be exterminated. It's a tremendous movie called Handmaid's Tale, Tale.
I found an incredible issue of Look magazine from the 60s, and we're gonna put this on the tape later on, with a cover story about concentration camps, vast concentration camps being built in America on the Nazi pattern. And they show photographs of these huge camps that are being built in preparation for either declaration of a state of emergency under whatever pretext, or for a future war against drugs. But this was right at the time the Americans landed on the moon in the late 60s. So basically the New World Order has been preparing 20 years in advance, which is the usual preparation.
Well, actually, it's on the dollar bill back in 1934. And the man who put the symbol of the New World Order on the back of the dollar bill on the pyramid, the Novus Ordo Seclorum, or the New World Order, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, known affectionately to his friends as FDR, Fraudulent Deficit Roosevelt. And he is the man that put the symbol on the back of the dollar bill, and he was a 33rd degree Mason, and incidentally he was also on the Council of 33 in Washington, D.C. So what would a 33rd degree Mason be putting the symbol of the New World Order on the back of the dollar bill for? Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a very, very evil man.
And you know, Jordan has mentioned that these people are basically perverts, and I think this is true because when you look at our present President, Bill Clinton, and I think the average American opinion of him today is that he wouldn't stop at anything. But you see, he's a Rhodes Scholar. Now you have to remember that the Rhodes Scholars arose out of a single man, Cecil Rhodes, never married, who was employed by the Rothschilds to seize the diamond and gold mines of South Africa from the rightful owners. And Cecil Rhodes was handsomely paid by the Rothschilds for this, and he surrounded himself with very handsome young men. And his gift to posterity was that after he died, his fortune was to be used to train handsome young men who were quite pliable and willing to be used by people like himself. That these Rhodes Scholars would become the new ruling elite of the world order. And of course, this is the origins of Bill Clinton's political career.
Absolutely.
Fascinating story. There were stories that, well, I mean, we're a little bit deviating here from the topic, but what I would like to say basically about the American education of the kids, I mean, I think that I find most fascinating, very briefly here, it's basically a rather long story, but we don't have much time. I mean, I'm coming from Bulgaria, which is in Eastern Europe, and Bulgaria fights with Romania for the place before the very last place in Europe, right in front of Albania. Bulgaria, Romania, and Albania, the last three least developed countries in Europe. However, we were fortunate enough to borrow our education from primary school all the way up to university from the German system. I mean, we were allies with the Germans for quite some time. Most of the Bulgarian professors graduated in Germany before the Second World War, and this left a very strong imprint on Bulgarian education. But in Bulgarian schools, I mean, we start a foreign language in 5th grade, which is Russian. In 7th grade, we start a second. I mean, Russian is closer to Bulgarian because it's a Slavic language, but in 7th grade, we start a Western language, which is German, English, or French by choice. We start a very massive study of world literature. In 5th grade, we study Greek literature, where you read actually from 1st grade, we're given a very long reading list to read these books at home. I'm talking about 25, 30 books, thick books. Children books have more pictures and so on, but by 4th grade, you're supposed to read Jules Verne in original. And you'll be given 20 books to read during the summer recess. In 5th grade, we started with ancient Greek literature. 6th grade, we studied ancient and medieval European literature. 7th and 8th grade, we studied in great detail Bulgarian literature. 8th grade, again, we studied Asian European and Middle, and 9th grade, modern European literature, and so on. I mean, on top of that, our curriculum of mathematics, geometry, and planimetry and trigonometry is basically high school curriculum of mathematics is equivalent to first or even second year of university level mathematics but it's most fascinating. One of the greatest disappointments and disillusionment of Bulgarian intellectuals and engineers, doctors, and technical have come to this country and that are looking for a place to know their future. But basically, the educational system here is a giant modernizing and cretinizing enterprise that is designed to produce the most pliable and docile specimen for the upcoming New World Order. What's your feeling on that, Eustace? I think that's probably a very important line in your book.
And it's, I would say it's the basis of my I trace the association. John Dewey and George S. Counts were sent to Moscow to be trained in the Pavlovian technique of conditioned reflex, and they came to Moscow and they were trained in this, and this was recorded, by the way, in the New York Times. That's where I got it from, the microfilm of the New York Times. And they came back here to set up the program for the entire United States system of education of the Pavlovian system of conditioned reflex, which, as you well know, is where Pavlov, a Russian scientist, found that he would, before he would feed the rat in the cage or the dog, he would ring a little bell, and so then when he rang the bell, the dog would salivate even if no food was forthcoming. Mm-hmm. And that he found it was very easy. Now this is basic behaviorism, which is the reigning, not only the reigning school of philosophy, but the reigning school of educational theory in the United States. That you can, with behaviorism, you can teach anybody to do anything, to condition them, to prepare them for a service as life, as a robot in the New World Order. And that is all American education is today.
And that's why we have that term in education today that we are, that young people are to be trained in jobs, that you get job training today.
Oh, job training is
job training.
That's the Rockefeller Foundation, which was the name of the Rockefeller Foundation before its present name was General Education Board.
Yes, the General
That's how
Education
important
Board.
This is.
Right. And the point I'm making is that you train a dog. You train an animal.
That's right.
You educate a human, but you train an animal. And so that's why they give us today in the education system job training, because they have to train you like an animal. They don't want to educate you. They train you to do your job.
That's right.
To put the screws in the whatever, and so they train you like a dog.
Fascinating. And we have not to forget that the Rockefeller Foundation is located in a high-rise building in New York.
New York,
that
the
has
Empire.
That has a number that is 666. The
Is
street
it?
number of that
Oh, very
building,
interesting.
somebody told me, is a 666, a very important number. I think there is a fight for all these 666 number buildings in
And incidentally,
big cities.
it's in New York, and New York is referred to as the Empire State because it's the state of the New World Empire.
Right.
New World Order. Well, gentlemen, it's time for the bottom line, final concluding statement.
Well, my concluding statement is that it is high time that people wake up to find and look around you. For someone many years ago said that many will look with their eyes but not see, and will listen with their ears but not hear. And that is certainly what has happened to America today. People are looking with their eyes, but they're not seeing what's going on. Symbols and emblems and national coats of arms and flags and fraternal orders, symbols are very, very important to the entire system under which we live. And until such time as you understand that this is a very occult order here in America that we live under, you're not going to get the inference that you need to understand. This country is being ruled from behind the scenes by some very desperate and diabolical people, and only until you wake up and to educate yourself are you going to have any kind of salvation for you, yourself, or your family. It's time to wake up.
Eustace, what's your concluding statement?
My message is to the parents of children in this country, and that is, don't sell your children down the river. Don't sell your children as slaves. Don't sell your children to perverts, and find out what is the basis of the educational program, and get the facts, and then make your own decision as to whether is this the future that you want for your children.
I mean, the countries in Eastern Europe gave a resounding answer to the whole world as to whether the socialist system is better than the capitalist system. Why should a public education socialistic system here in this country be better than a system of schools for private education, where basically the parents would be choosing the educational program, the parents would be choosing the school, and the teachers that would be in contact with their children. My concluding statement is very simple. I mean, number one should get his kids as quickly as possible from the public, out of the public education system. Let's vote with our feet. If the state was in charge of production of cars in this country, the situation would have been the very same as in the Soviet Union. One model of car never changed for 10 years. I mean, basically the Soviet Union has gone through 5 or 6 models of cars for the 80 years since the Bolshevik Revolution. This is how much the state is capable of creativity, innovation, and invention. And the American public educational system, compared to what it could have been if it were to be a private educational system, I mean, it is such an unfavorable comparison. Coming from Eastern Europe, from a totalitarian communist country, I never cease to be amazed how much this society not only smells of socialism, but it reeks of socialism and communism. And the sad story is that it is not by coincidence and mistake, but it was designed to be so. And thinking about Reagan's prophetic words about the evil empire on the other side of the curtain, I slowly come to realize that the real evil empire on this planet is actually on this side of the curtain. This is the ugly occult satano Luciferian model on which all the communist parties and secret societies within them, and the whole communist countries were patterned. And that basically the upcoming New World Order will be more evil and more inhumane, more devoid of love and affection and compassion than any of the ugliest Bolshevik or fascist or Nazi or communist social structures the world had ever seen. The experiments in Cambodia, the killing fields of Cambodia, where advisors from Washington were advising Pol Pot as to the best ways to reach the global 2000 objective of the reduction and elimination of the global population, were just pocket experiments of the future massive population eradication campaigns that have as a goal the final reduction of the population by 1 billion, by 2 billion, even as low as 500 million, as many such prognoses and scenarios have been putting forward. This is the conclusion of this tape, and this is just one of the many new and upcoming tapes that we have in mind. In the following tapes, we'll be talking about human genetic engineering that has been going on for more than 100 years with the purpose of the creation, the engineering of the super race and the superman, which will repopulate the planet after it is emptied by the numerous illuminated depopulation measures, and also many other interesting topics. Thank you very much all for your attention, and basically we wish you all success. We shall overcome.
It certainly will.